Hey guys, what's up? It's Samantha, and in this video, I'm going to be memory keeping the week of June 8th through the 14th, and also talking about all of the books that I read this week. Before I jump into talking about my books, I wanted to mention I'm using a Caress Press kit. This is a very old kit. I think it's called Hello Spring. This is from when she was open before she closed for a while, and then she's back open now. So this kit, I think, is about a year and a half. It could be 2 years. I honestly don't remember which spring, if I bought it spring of 2019 or 2018. I can't remember, but I really love this kit. I was going through my extra kit binder and I saw this. I was like, why haven't I used this yet? And you know, technically it's still spring the week of June 8th. So I decided to just go for it and use it. And I really love how it turned out. I actually ended up not using any foil at all this week, which is very different for me. I can't remember the last time I didn't use foil. And I carried on with my using lowercase letters in my lettering this week. And I really enjoyed it. I really like how this spread turned out. Very different for me. Don't think not using foil will normally be a thing I do, but it worked out really well for this kit. I honestly decided to just go no foil because I couldn't decide what foil color I wanted to use with it, and I think no foil was actually the right choice for this kit. So with all of that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump into talking about all of the books that I finished this week. So the first book that I finished was my arc of the Gilded Ones by Namina Forna, and this book was originally slated to come out in May of this year, but it is now coming out in February 9th of 2021. And honestly, I don't really have a ton to say about this book. I'm overall kind of ambivalent about it. It definitely read as younger YA, and I, as an adult, did not enjoy reading it as much as I've enjoyed reading other YA fantasy, but I am super thrilled that this book exists. I think having diverse own voices fantasy is very, very important. And I'm also excited as a teen librarian to have read a book that I think is appropriate for a younger tween or teen audience. There is very little romance in this book, and there's no sexual content at all, which is refreshing. A lot of YA fantasy, especially YA fantasy that I tend to enjoy, does have pretty romance-heavy stuff and can have sex in it, and that's great for older teens and for 20-somethings adults who read YA fantasy, but I really like finding books that I know I can wholeheartedly recommend to my tween readers. This book is a West African-inspired fantasy with a very strong feminist message. This world has like this religious system that is really focused on purity and is very harsh on women, and there's a lot of rules about what women can and can't do. And our main character, every girl when they're 15 or 16 gets bled to see if they have pure blood, and our main character is discovered to not be pure, to not have pure blood, and she is sentenced to death, but every time she is killed, she comes back to life, and she ends up being rescued and whisked away to this military training facility by this mysterious White Hands woman, and it's pretty generic YA fare, if I'm being honest, and as someone who's read very similar stories lots and lots of times, it just didn't speak to me in terms of like the plot. The main character is kind of a Mary Sue. There's some training montages, which feel pretty pointless because about 20 minutes into trying anything new, she's the best at it ever. But an 11-year-old reading this probably wouldn't feel the same way because they haven't read the same story 100 times over and over again. There was nothing wrong with it. The writing wasn't bad. I just didn't connect to it. But again, I'm not the right target audience for this book. So I'm glad it exists. I will definitely be recommending it to tweens and younger teens because I think they will really connect and enjoy this book. It just wasn't for me. That's fine. Not every book is. For me, it's probably around like a 2.5, just middle of the road. I felt pretty ambivalent about it. I didn't hate it. I didn't really like it. I ended up rounding it up to a 3 because I do think it'll be a really good book to recommend to tweens, but just didn't like work for me. So, moving on. The next book I read was also an Own Voices West African inspired fantasy, A Song of Wraiths and Ruin by Roseanne A. Brown, and I loved this one. This was such a wonderful, pleasant surprise. I have had so many difficulties with debut YA fantasy in 2020, just a lot of disappointments back to back to back. And this is finally a YA fantasy that I can gush about. I really enjoyed this. I give it like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Checks all of the boxes for things I like in YA fantasy. When I read YA fantasy, I tend to be a more character-driven reader, whereas in adult fantasy, I tend to prefer lots of world building and like the magic systems. This is everything I love in YA fantasy. It's a dual perspective with an enemies to lovers romance. But something I really appreciated about this book is that the romance doesn't steamroll the plot. The two main characters don't even meet until over halfway through the book, and they definitely go on their own personal character journey arcs. Like, they intersect, but they're not together the whole time, and their motivations for what they're doing aren't each other. I feel like that's a downfall of a lot of romance-centered YA fantasy, is two people meet, there's insta-love, and then everything they're doing ends up being like their motivation is this person that they just met like 3 pages ago, and you're like, this doesn't make sense. Like, why are you doing this for this person? You know, things like that. They definitely have their own motivations and their own personal journey. They are not on page together at all, but you do get to like watch their feelings develop as they very slowly get to know each other, and they are both trying to kill the other one, but they don't even, like, Karina, who is the female main character, doesn't even know that Malik's going to be the person she's going to kill, and she doesn't know Malik's trying to kill her, and both of them are very conflicted because they like each other, but their reasons for needing to kill each other are good, if that makes sense, which is a really like weird sentence to say. Something else that I really loved about this book is the setting was just so lush and vivid and completely integral to the story and the plot line. This story could not have taken place anywhere else, and that's something that I really appreciated. I felt like, just like a quick comparison, that the Gilded ones could have really taken place anywhere. The setting wasn't really integral to the story or the plot that was being told, but here, this like West African setting is so important to the story, and I really love how fully it was utilized. Just everything from the way the city is built to how people are dressed to the religion to the folklore was just so well done. And I love this book so much. It was really good. Like, it wasn't like a perfect book, but it was exactly what I'm looking for in YA fantasy. So like, really solid debut. I'm so excited to see what else Roseanne A. Brown is going to write in the future. I'm already jonesing for the sequel to this book. All of the things that I love in a YA fantasy. So I'd say I'd recommend this for fans of Aladdin. It's not an Aladdin retelling so much as there's elements of it that are inspired by Aladdin. And like for fans of Ember and the Ashes or the Daevabad trilogy, there's like something about the city itself that reminds me a lot of like Daevabad, and also like the way Cairo is written about. If you enjoy like how cities are written about, I don't know if that makes sense, but if you enjoy how like S.A. Chakraborty writes cities, you would like the setting of this as well. Just such a good book. The cover's gorgeous. I can't wait for the sequel. I'm so happy I finally found a YA fantasy to connect to in 2020, because I was like really getting ready to just be like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. So there's still good YA fantasy coming out. Yes. The next book I read was Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett, and I gave this 5 stars. Oh my gosh. This was such a pleasant surprise. Again, like my differences that I look for between YA fantasy and adult fantasy. This has a super awesome, strong magic system that's sort of similar to coding. It's called scriving. It's the idea that you can write like the language of creation on objects and imbue them with different characteristics, change what they believe they are. And it's very similar to coding. It's like giving instructions to objects, and then it behaves according to the like logic and instructions and rules it's been given. And yeah, I mean, it's just such a cool I haven't read a magic system quite like this before, and I was concerned going in that like a very tech-heavy magic system would be clunky or dry or like too convoluted. There'd be too many rules, too much logic. But there's like this really wonderful, fantastical lore woven in with this very tech-heavy magic that keeps it feeling very epic in scope, and it feels like a fantasy world, not like a steampunk world or anything like that. This is set in a Venetian-inspired setting, but it's like Venetian, but in the jungle, so it's also tropical. And there are these merchant houses that all have, like, they all create these scribed objects, and then the people that don't live in the merchant houses live in the area between called Foundryside, and we follow our main character, Sanchia, who is a thief, and she is hired by one of the merchant houses to steal something, and when she, like, peeks inside the box and finds out what this object is, it sets her off on this, like, quest because people are trying to kill her because she found out what this, like, super secret object is, and she ends up connecting with some other characters in this world that live in the merchant houses, and they all kind of end up planning this heist. It's awesome. I loved the heist elements of this. The characters are hilarious. The banter is awesome. The setting and atmosphere are just top-notch. I can't recommend this book highly enough. It's chef's kiss, perfection, 5 out of 5 stars. I honestly can't remember reading the first book in a fantasy series and being this blown away ever. Like, it's just so good. 5 out of 5 stars. Can't recommend this highly enough. Especially if you're like a fan of Mistborn, you're looking for, like, if you like Brandon Sanderson's very, like, comprehensive, rule-based, hard magic systems, I would say you would really enjoy this as well. And then the last book that I read this week was a novella, Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi. This is a book that's been on my radar for months. I kept putting it on hold on Libby, and then my hold would lapse because I was reading something else, and I'd put myself back on the hold list, and with everything going on with Black Lives Matter and people seeking out more books by Black authors, the hold list on this had like quadrupled, and it was going to be months before I saw it again if I put it back on hold. So I decided to just sit down and read it all at once. I didn't realize how short it was. It was only about 170 pages. It took me less than 2 hours to read. And this was a very impactful book. The concepts and ideas and messages presented here gave me a ton of food for thought. It follows 2 siblings in this sort of near future dystopian America where, like, we follow, like, with systemic racism and the prison industrial complex and sort of like the expansion of the prison industrial complex. And the brother ends up in prison, and the sister develops these supernatural powers, and she can see into people's pasts and their futures, and she can also, like, astrally project herself, and she projects herself into her brother's prison cell, and it's got both of their points of view, like, from perspectives. However, I really struggled to connect to the writing style in this book. It's very uniquely written, and I just don't know that it 100% worked for me. There's a lot of weird sentence structure and some, like, weird tense changes, and I found myself very confused a lot of the time. There isn't a ton of plot in this book. It's very, like I said, it's very short, so there's not, it's, like, hard to even talk about what happens. I'm really struggling to figure out how to talk about this book. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. I don't even really know if this is, like, a book I can fully rate. I so deeply appreciated what it did, and I think it accomplished what it set out to do, but I just really didn't love the writing style. So I ended up just settling on 3 stars because I have such mixed feelings about this, and I definitely think it's worth checking out, especially because it's so short. The time investment in reading this versus, like, the payoff of the concepts presented, like, it definitely is worth giving it a go if it sounds like something that's even remotely up your alley. If you want like a weird, unique, impactful novella dealing with like systemic racism in America, and, you know, that sounds like it's up your alley, I would give it a go. You're not losing out on too much time by trying it. So those are my very disjointed thoughts about Riot Baby. I'm glad I finally read it though. And then that's everything I read this week. And this is the finished spread. I really like how it turned out. Like I said, not much happened this week. I read a lot. My parents did visit on Saturday, and Joe and my dad did some landscaping outside. I shared pictures of our hydrangeas on Instagram. That's really the only thing of note that happened this week. It was a very chill week once again because we were just at home the whole time. So that is everything from me. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I will have all of the books I talked about linked down below. And I will also have links to my Instagram and Goodreads. Make sure you're following me there. I share lots of planner and book goodness on Instagram. And if you're ever interested in what I've read or what I'm reading, I update Goodreads pretty much daily. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you in my next one. Bye, guys.